Hi, Teresa.
Hi, are you able to move over to a panelist?
How do I do that?
It should show on your screen. I keep trying
Now
to
it
promote
does.
you.
There we go.
You got it? Okay, looks like you just received it.
I'm back.
Thanks.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Fantastic.
Great.
I'll close my door.
There's Commissioner Webb. Good to see you, Commissioner Webb. We'll get started here in a couple minutes.
Would you like me to start the recording, Chair Cleland?
Yes, please. All right, we've got 10:30 on the dot, and we've got a full board here too as well. Work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there's generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings held twice monthly. And Teresa has pulled up the rolling agenda. You can kind of see what's coming up. Anybody have any questions, comments?
Chair Quilo, if I
County
might.
Manager?
Thank you, Chair Quilo, members of the board. I just wanted to also note on October 9th, there will also be an executive session that we'll be having to talk about a property issue. And so that'll be on the 9th also. And that's the time that we'll also talk about CFTLC, as your board has talked about that recently.
Great. Thank you, County Manager. Any questions? All right. We'll move on to the topics at hand. We have the overview of goal exception process on page 2. And Gail Henriksen, our Community Development Director.
Hey,
Gail?
good morning, Chair. Thank you. And good morning, board members. Let me just share my screen quickly. Thank you for your time this morning. I just wanted to take this opportunity to have a little bit of a discussion with your board to walk you through the process for some upcoming public hearings that you'll be having on October 23rd and November 13th. And the hearings are related to an application for an exception to Goal 16. And your board has only dealt with goal exceptions once about a year ago when we did some cleanup work down in the Arch Cape area, and there were 2 exceptions to goal 11 that your board approved. And so since this is a brand new application as opposed to a cleanup like we did last year, I just wanted to take this opportunity and look at the criteria that your board will be looking at and take you through that process. So when we talk about goal exceptions, what we're talking about is an exception to one of the 19 statewide planning goals. And of the 19 goals, all but one apply to Clatsop County, and that's goal 15, which only covers the Willamette River Greenway. The goals 16, 17, 18, and 19 are referred to as the coastal goals. They deal with estuarine resources, so the estuaries along the Columbia River, the Nicanicum, and Ecola Creek. Goal 17 deals with coastal shorelands, which are, for example, the lakes along the Clatsop Plains and then areas along the Columbia River. Goal 18 deals with beaches and dunes, and then Goal 19 deals with ocean resources, which are the areas in the territorial sea off the coast of Clatsop County in the state of Oregon. So the application that will come before you at the end of October is going to be focused on Goal 16 and dealing with estuarine resources. And just as a bit of background for this, when part of the reason that these applications are coming forward to you is that Oregon participates in the Coastal Management Zone Act. And you can see on the map on the right of your screen the area that is included in the Coastal Management Zone, and that's almost the entirety of Clatsop County. It basically goes from the mouth of the Columbia River, or actually the territorial sea inland, up to about River Mile 40. And so there are layers of rules and regulations and partners that all come together in this. And part of what forms the basis for the management program are the coastal goals that I just talked about, the estuarine resources, the shorelands, the beaches and dunes, and the territorial sea. And then there's a separate plan for the territorial sea. There's a separate estuary management plan for each of the estuaries. And then we also have to look at hazard planning, erosion and floodplains primarily. And then federal consistency kind of lays on top of that, and federal consistency is required for any federal agency. They have to be able to demonstrate that their project is consistent with local rules and state policies. So the application that's going to come before you at the end of the month is related to work that the Army Corps is doing. They don't actually have to apply for permits with the county, but they still have to show that their work is consistent with the policies in our comprehensive plan and with the regulations that are on our books. And at this point in time, they're not quite complying with that, and that's holding up their water certification certificate. And that is what has prompted the applications that you'll be reviewing in the future. So goal 16, again, covers estuary resources, and the policies in our comp plan are based upon the estuary management plan for the Columbia River. The plan was originally created in the late 1970s and updated in the 1980s, but really hasn't been touched since that time. And even though we're in the process of updating our goals 16, 17, 18 right now, we're not updating the estuary management plan. That is a huge undertaking requiring hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we are actually hoping that the state will be able to take that up in the next couple of years and get that plan updated. But for right now, we're working with the plan that we have. So the estuary management plans, we have 3 of them in Clatsop County, one for the Columbia River, one for the Nicanicum River, and one for Ecola Creek. And when you have an estuary management plan, it looks at each water body and classifies it as one of 3 types of estuaries. You're either a natural estuary where your natural resources are of such quality that you don't want to have development or very, very limited levels of development. You have conservation estuaries where you have some natural resources that should be protected, but there may also be opportunities for limited development in those waters. And then you have what are called development estuaries. And the Columbia River is a development estuary. It's considered deep draft. So we have obviously the Federal Navigation Channel that's dredged down to 43 feet. And it is appropriate to have more intense levels of development in the development estuary like the Columbia River. Once you have established what type of estuary you're working with, then those plans break each estuary down into smaller management units and looks at different types of vegetation, the species that are there, and classifies each area of the estuary itself into either a natural, conservation, or development category. So I'm going to pause there just for a moment to see if there are any questions about the material so far. There's a lot of stuff there.
Any questions?
Okay.
Not seeing any.
All right. So again, here's the Columbia River estuary classified as deep draft. When we work through this process, we are going to be focusing at the local level on these types of issues. So we are going to be looking at regional policies that are covering the Columbia River estuary. Within our comp plan, we're going to be looking at the different sub areas, so it's different types of management units and sub areas within the Columbia River estuary. We have 22 sub areas in our plan, so there's a lot of area and different sub areas that are covered and addressed in Goal 16. We also have a dredge material management plan, and you may recall that at the beginning of January last year, we did readopt the 2005 dredge material management plan that was created by CREST. Previously, we had adopted it by reference, and in order for us to be able to enforce it, we had to go back and actually readopt the plan itself. Goal 16 also has mitigation and restoration policies, and then there are a variety of supporting documents that are included in the plan. So as a county, we are the keeper of the estuary management plans. So we are the first ones to look at changes to the plan. And then as we adopt those changes, because they are also going to affect the cities of Warrenton and Astoria, each city will also have to look at its comprehensive plan and policies and adopt appropriate changes in relationship to what we will be looking at as a county. And so as we move down that food chain, you've got obviously your Coastal Zone Management Act, you've got the statewide planning goals, you have the estuary management plan, which the policies then move into our comprehensive plan. And the way that we implement that is through our law doc and the maps that are adopted along with the zoning and the land use designations. So goal exceptions are kind of like variances, if you're familiar with the variance request. It's a way for a property owner to ask, or an applicant to ask for some sort of waiver to the existing rules. And so there are very detailed criteria that you have to meet, which are outlined in OAR 660-004-0020. And there are three types of goal exceptions. So one exception is if the land that you're looking at has already been physically developed in a way that's not consistent with the goal. Another way that you can have an exception is if you have a piece of land that is surrounded by other uses that would prevent you from developing your land in a way that meets the intent of the goal. And then the third reason is called a reasons exception. And that's what we will be looking at on October 23rd and November 13th. And for a reasons exception, an applicant has to meet 4 different standards. So, and they have to meet all of them. It's not 3 out of 4 or 1 out of 4. They have to meet all 4 standards. So the first standard they have to meet is they have to explain the reasons, which is why it's called a reasons exception, the reasons why the goal that shouldn't apply to their project or property. The second threshold that they have to meet is they have to show that there are no other areas available where they could do the same project but not have to take a goal exception. And that's a very high bar. A lot of applicants cannot meet it because oftentimes we don't see it so much with regard to the river so much, but we see it with applicants who want to come in and take exceptions to build housing, and they have to be able to show that there are no other properties available in the county where they could put a house that they wouldn't have to take a goal exception. So it's a very high bar. The third threshold looks at impacts from the project. So the applicant would have to show that the proposed project isn't going to create any more impacts on their property than if they took that same project to a different piece of land that also required a goal exception. So for example, if I had a piece of property and I applied for a goal exception, but my project would impact, say, some sort of endangered type of flora, but I could take my project and go over to this property and apply for a goal exception, but that same threatened or endangered flora isn't on the property. Obviously, my property would have a greater impact on just resources in general than the other property. So again, a very high bar to cross. You have to be able to show that your project impacts are not greater than they would be anywhere else. And then the fourth criteria that an applicant is required to meet is one that's common to most development applications, is you have to show that what you're doing is going to be compatible with the uses that are around you. And then goal exceptions also, in addition to those criteria out of OAR, have to comply with all the other local standards and policies that are already in the comp plan and in the LADUC. So any questions about the reasons exception or the criteria for the reasons exception? Okay, seeing none. Oh, Commissioner Thompson?
Well, thank you. Because I don't deal with this all day long, every day, and never have, I want to trust that when you bring this to us, you'll reference all of these reasons so that we all have a complete context. Because I think that's what you always do, but I just please make sure you do that.
No, I will, Commissioner Thompson. And the staff report went out yesterday because this will go to the Planning Commission first. They're going to review it on October 8th at their meeting. In fact, here's a slide. And they will be making a recommendation to your board. And so one of the things I did want to emphasize is that when you get your October 23rd Board of Commissioners agenda package, you are going to see a very long staff report. And I don't want it to be frightening or overwhelming or in any way intimidating. Most of the pages in the staff report are code citations. And so where we lay out, these are the applicable policies in our comp plan, the OAR, the LADUC, state statute, and then compare the project to those requirements to determine whether or not the project can meet it. And so what you'll really want to focus on in that staff report is really the staff findings, and in particular towards the end of the report where we look at the 4 reasons for the goal exception. That in particular will be where you would like to focus a lot of your attention. But it will be a very long staff report, but again, most of it's code citations. So and so just to go back for a second. So once the county moves through this process, and we're looking at completing that on November 13th after the second reading before your board, then the cities of Astoria and Warrenton will also need to review these applications and adopt amendments to their comprehensive plans and or implementing ordinances. And so that will continue on a separate path, but we are the lead in this process because we are the keeper of the estuary plan. And so that was a very fast walkthrough through the goal exception process. And I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. I know that as we get to the October 23rd hearing, you will most likely have a lot more questions, but this hopefully just gives you a very basic grounding in the reasons exception process and what you'll need to focus on as you come into those public hearings. And at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Do we have any questions? Any additional questions, comments? All right, thank you very much, and we'll be seeing this come back to us in
Okay.
a few weeks. Thanks
Yep.
again.
Thank you.
Next is the ambulance service provision and plan amendments, page 14. And Justin Gibbs, our Clatsop County Emergency Management Director. I will turn it over to you, Justin.
Chair, commissioners, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to acknowledge that I'm also joined by Sean Bayard, who is the CEO for the Metro West family of companies, and he will also be contributing to this conversation. So wanted to acknowledge that. We also extended an invitation to Dr. Silka, who is the medical director for Medics and also the medical director for the Columbia Memorial Hospital emergency room. But Dr. Silka had a conflict, so Sean will be kind of addressing, parts of the conversation related to Dr. Silka's relationship and kind of his goals and objectives for the EMS system in the county. So I want to apologize up front. I know that the letter that I prepared had lots of information. It was very comprehensive. So I want to apologize up front for that, but I definitely wanted to try to address all of the concerns that had been brought forward by the fire department. And the way that I plan on approaching this conversation is a high-level summary of the response. And then if any of the commissioners have any questions, feel free to ask those of me. So with that, are there any questions before I get started?
Not seeing any, Justin.
Okay. So I want to maybe give some background before I get into the letter and response itself. Maybe a general overview of the system, because EMS, emergency medical services, is really a system, and there are a number of different components, and some of those components are within our control. Some of those components are outside of our control. I'm just going to give a breakdown of what the system looks like in Clatsop County and identify some of the gaps, because I think the letter, the concern that the fire departments brought forward, I think it definitely identified some gaps in the system. I guess starting in that conversation, really how EMS is handled in Clatsop County starts with the 911 centers. So there's a 911 call placed. Those centers are in Seaside and Astoria. They receive the 911 call. They begin the process of processing that call to get first responders en route. So they get some preliminary information to dispatch the fire departments to get first responders on the way. And then that call is transferred to Medics and their dispatch center. At the dispatch center, they do some additional processing. So that's actually where emergency medical dispatch protocols are applied. So anyone calling, requesting medical services, they go through a protocol that's been informed by their medical director. And the intention of that protocol is to further identify the issue and to resource manage. So categorizing what level of a response it should be, what is the type of medical emergency, and that medical response kind of dictates, are we responding emergent traffic with lights and sirens? Is this a non-emergent call where that's not required? Is this, basic life support? Is it advanced life support? It helps to inform kind of how those resources are assigned to that particular call. This is an area that can create gaps, because anytime you have intersection between different elements of the system, there could be some conflicts that are created. So with the 911 centers not currently EMDing calls and medics EMDing calls, you could have a different level of response. The fire departments could be responding emergent. The ambulance could be responding, non-emergent. So there could be a conflict created there, and that's where pre-arrival communication becomes important. And I think that's one of the issues that we're going to talk about in the response letter, is creating that relationship and a flow of information from the first responders and the ambulance to gain situational awareness. Because as with any system, I mean, it's dependent upon the caller and what information they can provide to accurately assign resources. So, outside of that process, it does require communication and the development of situational awareness. And then once the ambulance arrives on scene, there's another intersection. So there's the transfer of care between the first responders and the ambulance to ultimately transport that person to the hospital. There, we're experiencing kind of an issue here in Clatsop County where, and it's really kind of a Oregon issue, but the fire departments have separate medical direction from the ambulance service provider. So you can have different sets of protocols that those agencies are operating off of. So there could be different medications that are being given. There could be, different treatments that are being applied. There could be, different elements that they're assessing to determine what the best route of transportation is, whether that's air ambulance or ground, because those protocols also have policies and procedures contained within them. So that's another potential conflict in our system that through this process we're going to be resolving. So I think that gives a high level overview of the system and maybe some of the gaps. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So with that, I'll move into the letter itself. I met with the Fire Defense Board on August the 13th, I believe, where I received their concern letter. In that concern letter, they addressed, some systemic issues, some very call-specific issues, and we've done our best to try to be responsive to that. But I will say, there is some system development that needs to happen to address some of these gaps. So there's an appropriate forum, because in my role as the ASA administrator for the county, the ASA plan is very specific to the transport component of EMS. It's not like a system administration where, we're also informing how first responders, apply medical treatment, and really the ASA doesn't get into medical treatment as much as just the delivery of that service. So ensuring that our ambulance is responsive, it is one of the primary kind of performance measures in the ASA plan. And my role in that as the ASA administrator is really the upkeep and maintenance of the plan, and then ensuring compliance with components of the plan. And that compliance relates directly to the services that are being provided by the franchise holder, by Medix, because they are performing that transport component. So there are other elements outside of transport that are part of the system that we need to fill some gaps and make sure that there's coordination and collaboration between those different elements. So in addressing the specific concerns by the Fire Defense Board, I'll just kind of go down the specific requests that they had. I believe there were 6 of them. So the first request was that we ensure that there are 2 paramedic ambulances in the county at all times. In reviewing the contract requirements over the entirety of kind of our relationship with Medix, historically that has never been a requirement in the agreement. The requirement was more related to the response level and responding to calls, not so much the coverage requirements. So it's never required that we have 2 paramedic ambulances in the county at all times. It has required that we maintain 2 ambulances in the county at all times and 3 in the service area, which includes Ilwaco, because Medix also provides service across the river. I will say we have been, I think, with the latest amendment to the to our agreement with Medix, we've tried to address, coverage in a responsible way, and that is that we are now requiring that they maintain paramedic level coverage to the fullest extent possible, and we have added a performance measure in that any time that our coverage falls below paramedic level, there's a reporting requirement now, which I think is a reasonable expectation, because, and we'll get into this later, there are requirements of the ASA holder outside of just 911 services. They also supply services to the hospital. So, and that's covered in the specialty care transport. But Commissioner Webb, I see your hand.
I just want to come in here and say that in the couple of years that I've been the liaison to the ASA committee, I have painfully learned how very complicated this situation is. And even though Justin has tried really hard to educate me with the state statutes and with the ORSs, et cetera, one of the things I think that makes this system so complicated is that there are so many definitions of things that are more complex than we assume. And one of them, I guess, Justin, that it might be helpful if in your presentation, you can explain the different levels of what we call the folks who travel in the ambulances are, the differences between an EMT and all those other levels of expertise.
Okay.
This is really an incredibly complex system, which is it's state, local, regional, et cetera. And so I really would encourage folks, my fellow commissioners, to stop Justin if he's saying something that you don't quite understand, because it's really complicated. So thanks, Justin. I just wanted to insert that
yes,
definitions
thank you.
important. Thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner Thompson?
Well, thank you, Commissioner Webb. I appreciate your service on this committee. I come at it from a slightly different point of view in that I have been a CERT for 15 years and look at how does a community support the response capacity and integrate fully with the professionals. So I'm grateful for what our service providers do. The complexity of dealing with just the transportation system when you've got the development along the coast and then along the river, because it's what, 2 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours on a good day to cover that, just the perimeter. And then when we're coming inland. So the complexity isn't just with the certifications and the qualifications of the people at the various certifications. It's the on the ground stuff. So Justin, this may be a longer conversation than we can have, and it may integrate with our traffic safety initiative that we were able to get some funding for. So I see this as an ongoing conversation, because it's not enough that we have a commissioner who attends. That's important and valuable. But also, how do we assure that anybody who's coming here has a reasonable expectation of emergency medical response? So I want that broader, deeper, longer, more nuanced process, please.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is continuous improvement, because when you talk about medical services, there's no one magic bullet that's going to solve all the issues. We've got to be constantly engaged in conversation, because Sean will probably talk about this too, but the medical system is constantly evolving. We're learning better ways to treat patients in the field and in our hospitals. And so it's a constant process of trying to better, how we're delivering services. But kind of to Commissioner Webb's point, I was going to address that through our conversation today, and maybe I'll lean on Sean as well to get into some of the more details about provider levels and what they can do in Oregon, but more generally, we really look at the provision of pre-hospital care in kind of two buckets. You've got basic life support and advanced life support. So basic life support includes, drivers in rural systems. You may have somebody that's unlicensed that can, unlicensed as far as medically licensed, but can drive an ambulance. You have emergency medical responders, and you have emergency medical technicians that fall in that basic life support category. And then as far as advanced life support, that is your advanced emergency medical technicians, your intermediates and paramedics. And you can also, when you're dealing with like interfacility transfers and stuff, like you could have doctors or nurses on an ambulance, because they require, a higher level of care than, and it's known they've been diagnosed. So that's kind of a high level of how the certifications are categorized. And with our recent amendment to the franchise contract, we broadened kind of the coverage requirement piece of it. From prior, it specifically said paramedics, but we changed that language to say advanced life support. So that way you can leverage, a number of providers to provide that level of service. So that includes advanced EMTs, intermediates, and paramedics. And in no way was that to supplant paramedics. I think the goal of it was resource management. And that's a very important part of the conversation, is how we're managing our resources. Because we have been experiencing a national paramedic shortage for over a decade, just like we've been experiencing a nursing shortage for an extended period of time. So even prior to COVID, we had a deficiency in the resources that we needed to administer the system. But then with COVID, as you'll see later in our conversation, we saw a dramatic increase in the call volume here in Clatsop County, and I'm sure, you know, throughout the nation, and that call volume has not returned to pre-COVID levels. We're still elevated and may remain that way. So I think, you know, we may have been able to manage prior to COVID, but with that increase in call volume, it definitely, over a short period of time, it put providers in a position that they had to make immediate, you know, recommendations to try to ensure that patients, people calling 911, were getting ambulances. And that's one of the most important parts of the system, is being responsive. And I know prior, it's brought up in the Fire Defense Board's letter. I know in the mid 90s and up until COVID, we may have been able to provide paramedics on every ambulance. But I believe that the increased call volume that we started to experience showed a vulnerability in the system, and required some changes, and requires us to think about how we manage the system going forward. Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you, sir. Well, I think in addition to COVID, the legalization of drug use and the lack of criminal sanctions and the whole explosion in homelessness that was compounded by drug use. I hear a lot about the stressors on everybody associated with the healthcare system. I don't know if we're seeing it. I mean, it just started September 1st that we are recriminalizing, that we are exercising deflection policies. But if there's a way to capture the data to track trends, I think it would be helpful for us.
Yep. Okay. Chair?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And I do want to hear from Sean as well. I'm sorry that Dr. Silka wasn't able to join us. Chief Ellsbury had a conversation with me about a month ago about this. I know it's a big concern about the paramedics, and I know we talked about the different levels of medical service that is available, but not having paramedics, at least 2 of them throughout the county, you know, you wouldn't get a letter like this if it wasn't a real concern of all of the chiefs. So yes, I'd love to see us kind of progress to getting there. I understand that there's a lack of resources, but man, we have to be able to provide this. These are volunteers in all of these communities, in most cases, that are working extremely hard. Like you said, volumes are up. This is a huge demand on so many of these departments. So yes, if we can get there with getting paramedics and more paramedic units out there, obviously that's ideal. But I'd love to hear from Sean too.
Sure. Justin, if it's all right with you, I'll jump in a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree completely that our goal is to get a whole lot more paramedics out there. I'll touch on it briefly and then jump back to it later, but we do have our in-house
I will call them after this meeting.
Ooh.
Why are we paying?
I don't know. It should be the law, the attorneys. That's why I said I'll call and figure out what's going on.
Hey, Commissioner Toyoka, you're on, you're
Huh?
not
The county.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me figure that out real quick again, because I thought we had it settled.
Hey, John. Hey, John, you're not muted.
What we have been doing is sponsoring both EMT level and paramedic level training at Medic's expense. We can hire an employee in, pay them to become an EMT. They work on the wheelchair van service and learn the area while they're in their EMT training. And then once they've been approved to work on an ambulance after gaining that initial EMT basic level licensure, they work as the partner to our current paramedics and become eligible if they prove to be within a few months, a good candidate for paramedic training. We pay for them to go on to paramedic school, which is actually a hybrid program that's based out of Boston, because unfortunately, as Justin alluded, we have some system issues in Oregon, and we don't have a local provider that can crank them through in a year like we can do when we have them do this out-of-state program. But they do come back. They stay here, they work while they're going through school on the online portion. They go back to Boston a couple different times for more intensive training, and then they come back and do their clinical training at CMH. So currently we have 5 in the EMT training, and we have 5 in paramedic classes, which will, considering we have, I think, 9 full-time paramedics on staff at the moment, 5 will be like a 50% increase in that availability when they graduate, and those stagger. I think the first of them will be finishing school about the end of the year, beginning of 2025 and through the spring. And we continue to search for more students within our EMT recruitment. We sponsor 3 cohorts a year system-wide. So as we find a couple more eligible candidates from medics, we will get them into our spring enrollment and a couple more in our fall enrollment, and then just on a revolving basis. As well as obviously recruiting from the outside, but recruiting from the outside is quite difficult. Commissioner Webb?
Yes. Why can't we get a local training program in Oregon? I find the idea of, I fly to the East Coast several times a year myself. And so it's a drag. And I can imagine what it does to people's lives. Why can't we do that? Why can't we get something going in the state of Oregon through OHSU or through some of our providers and our training facilities? What's the holdup with that?
To be fair, there are a couple of programs that are going in Oregon. OHSU has one, but it's a on-campus, sort of residential oriented program, which does, for coming from a commuter, it isn't going to work. And what we find is our best candidates, the people who will stay here, come from here. Right. And so getting them out of the area to train. So that's why we're trying to work with these local schools to develop a hybrid approach so that they can do attend their lectures remotely, and then do a similar thing, but based out of the OHSU, or Chemeketa Community College has a large program as well.
Sean, can you address the other part of the conversation too, though? It's not just getting them through the training. There's also a requirement in Oregon that they have an associate's degree.
Yes, and we're the only state right now in the country that has that. And it's not an associate degree in paramedic science or any. It can be any field. So if you come in and want to work in Oregon, and we have a national registry of paramedics and EMTs, that is what typically states accept as, once you're nationally registered, you can move and reciprocate. In Oregon, a little bit special, got to have this associate degree requirement. So we have lobbied along with the fire departments together, the ambulance providers and the fire departments, at least whittled that back. Recently, they changed it to where you can come in on a provisional and have a couple of years to work on whittling away at your associate's degree, as long as you complete it within the time frame. And forgive me, I can't remember what the exact time frame is, but that's been a real barrier to bringing people in, because they're already working in the field and somewhere else, and they can go anywhere. So they don't really want to go back to school and just finish a degree and pick a topic.
Well, and Sean, the other thing to that is that's a financial burden to the individual. I mean, they have to get their associate's degree to even be a paramedic. So with this grace period, one of the concerns that I have, and it may address our issues in the short term, but you may have people that get their provisional and then drop out.
They might not finish.
Yes. So it may resolve our issues for a short period of time, but will not be.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult where we work, on both sides of the river here, and that's not a requirement in Washington, but it is in Oregon, and trying to navigate some of that becomes a problem. I did want to make a quick couple of comments. I know I don't know how we are on time, and I don't want to eat up too much, but I did want to mention Dr. Silka and I have been meeting regularly, and he, of course, has reviewed all of the concerns as well from the chiefs that have come forward. And that's where the genesis for this idea of a multi-agency peer review type group to come together came. And I feel very good about that. We participate in that in other areas that we work, and find that you create a spot where all the agencies are represented, the fire first responders, volunteers, the hospital departments, medical directors, ambulance people. Those operational things, both on an individual case, can be discussed in confidentiality. And a lot of times there are perception issues, as Justin alluded to. The pre-hospital medicine is moving very fast right now, and things come into favor, out of favor. We use protocols based on a peer-reviewed set of protocols that out of the Tri-County area from OHSU. We're trying to get everybody onto the same page. I think that committee will help, so that because a lot of what I find is that it's just misunderstanding of expectations about what should happen on a call. And as we clear those up, people then all kind of start rowing together in the boat, and that will help. So I'm very excited about that peer review committee, and hopefully we can report back some success stories out of that, because really what happens is, sure, you look at individual cases, but you also then, that committee can be the driver for what is the policy change, what is the plan change that needs to take place, so we're all lined up, and I think that'll help immensely. The other couple of high level things I wanted to touch on are that last session, Oregon passed a EMS modernization piece of legislation that creates a bunch of regional groups around the state to work together on system-wide issues. And there will be a region that includes Clatsop County, that certainly our company will be participating, and I'll be encouraging anybody from the county, as that gets stood up, to continue to participate, because that'll help solve some problems as well.
Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you, sir. Well, that region, does that include the Portland? In other words, does it go from west to east, or does it go along the coast, north to south?
I don't think they've released the maps yet, so I don't know quite where we will fit. But yeah, there's always a concern that.
Well, and I will also say that as part of the modernization legislation, they've also created advisory boards that are looking at it through a statewide lens. And I actually just recently received notification that I've been selected to serve on the EMS advisory board as the ambulance service area administrator representative. That'll start helping informing kind of how EMS is structured going forward in the state of Oregon. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity. Commissioner Thompson, did you have more that you would?
I did. Well, congratulations on that. So that licensing requirement for the associate's degree, is that under are the EMTs under the nursing board or the Board of Medical Examiners?
Their license is now under the Oregon Health Authority, has an EMS division within it in the public health department. But their scope of practice, that is what they can do with that license, is determined by the Oregon Medical Board.
Well, because one of our legislative delegation, Senator Weber or Rep. Javity, may be able to introduce a bill to amend their scope of practice to eliminate that requirement. They may be available and willing. I don't know if we're still timely, but if a legislative fix would cure that, it seems that that would make your life a lot easier.
See,
I guess.
Commissioner Webb has a question.
Yeah,
Commissioner?
go ahead.
Well, this is this is a much larger issue. I know that in my work in the state workforce board, it's a very common problem throughout the country, actually, in licensing requirements that differ from state to state, and especially in areas like ours, where our workforce areas, our labor markets, are often interstate. And it's a huge issue. It's something that we deal with everything from cosmetologists to, to much more complicated and high-levelly trained people. And I thank you, Commissioner Thompson, because I think this is an issue that we should be talking with our both Washington and Salem, our representatives and our lobbyists about, because it is especially a problem in the care professions. Everything from from people who spend an hour with an elderly person in their home a day, all the way to sophisticatedly trained people like EMTs. This is a really big issue for us in terms of a national labor market. And so I hope our county managers listening. And this is an issue that we can start talking with our lobbyists about.
And in the short term, just to let you know, Representative Graber, who worked on EMS issues last session and is a paramedic firefighter at Tualatin Valley Fire, is going to be introducing a workforce component to add on to the EMS work that was done last time around. And there is discussion happening around a program in that, which is called Replica. And I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically an interstate licensing compact so that we could move EMTs and paramedics around easier. I don't know the status because I haven't talked to our lobbyists who are representing us with her on it. But if you are interested in that this session, I would encourage you to reference that because I think there is some work already kind of happening around it. I don't know how far along it is.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I will say, Commissioner Webb, I really appreciate that recognition. I was going to point out that there's very much a socioeconomic component to, this discussion that, we weren't really going to be able to get into today, but very much appreciate the opportunity to continue those conversations because one of the things that we're seeing here in Oregon, unlike, the nursing field, you have a lot of traveling, nurses, but you don't have a lot of traveling paramedics. And it's just because the local demand is so high and how how systems are responding to that financially and incentivizing picking up more shifts and working overtime really doesn't incentivize, looking at, moving around kind of, they have all the work they could ever want, where they live. So, but I think that's definitely a component to the conversation and something that Oregon is going to have to look at statewide as far as how we're managing our resources. So, but I guess it was a good transition, because the next item was around staffing. I did want to point out that Medics has made a lot of strides, and I also wanted to point out, I know I didn't include this on the original item that was in your package, but there is a schedule that Medics is implementing that's in your package, but it did not identify the level of care of those units. And I wanted to point out there are 7 units that Medics is trying to staff on a daily basis. All of those are paramedic level with the exception of 2. There's only 2 AEMT or intermediate level ambulances in the system. And they only have the staffing for 2, as you will see in the Medics letter. I think they maybe have 4 AEMTs and 4 intermediate. So it's not like paramedic level services being supplanted. The system's being augmented. They're trying to fill those paramedic units, but what's happening is they may not get a particular paramedic slot filled. So that leaves a basic provider available to be partnered with an advanced or an intermediate level provider. So that's where you're seeing these AEMT and intermediate ambulances being integrated into the system. It's when they haven't been successful in filling a paramedic slot. They're not replacing paramedics. And I just wanted to make that distinction that there is every effort being made to staff paramedics. Paramedic ambulances are being staffed currently 90% of the time, where we have at least 2 paramedic staffed ambulances, and that too is mainly at night. It's often much more than that, 4 or 5 paramedic ambulances out of all those that they're staffing. So it's not like we don't have paramedics out there working today, and that's why we've seen the improvement in the responsiveness is because there's more flexibility in the staffing pattern. So that way we can ensure that ambulances are still available and still responding to calls, even though we may fall short of our paramedic staffing goal.
And Justin, the 2 paramedics are in Clatsop County, not across the river?
Yeah, so there is some support and supplanting of the system that's happening. So there are some Metro West units that are coming in, and also units from the Longview area to support our system in meeting those goals. That's kind of like one of the reasons I've been reluctant to kind of recommend a change in the contractual obligations, just because our system is being supported, and I appreciate that Medics is leveraging those resources to ensure we have the providers available locally to respond to our calls, and I know that they're making every effort to generate the staff and fill the staffing requirements. But I do also want to point out that as this happens, as providers increase their level, it generates other holes in staffing. So you may be losing basics because they're going to an intermediate or paramedic level. So it's an iterative process. It's not like, all the problems are going to be solved overnight. So I don't know if you want to add any more to that, Sean, but
No, I think that pretty well sums it up. We consider our, yeah, and to the chair's comment about locally here, you know, the core area is where we go at the minimum of two. They are in the what we consider the core, which is the you know, running out of our populated center in the Clatsop County area.
But I will also say that that Medics has been, and Metro West has been very intentional in how they utilize those outside resources. Like they're being more utilized in providing the level of service that the hospitals require in interfacility transfers. Yes, they can be leveraged in 911. And that's something that also needs to be pointed out as well. Every ambulance that Medic staffs is a 911 ambulance. They have no other fleet of ambulances that are handling service to the hospitals. They're all 911 ambulances. So, and we need to understand that through the ASA and contractual obligations and state law, they have just as much of a requirement to meet the demand from the hospitals as they do from the general public. So they've got to balance that.
And what we do for that is we have continually developing guidelines so that the most appropriate use of resources happens. So if we have a day where we have the advanced level ambulances in as an augment to the paramedic ones, and there's a transfer that's going to be taken out of Seaside or CMH over to the Valley to one of the other hospitals, we try to use those, you know, unless they're a very complex patient with a whole lot of medications going on, we try to use those advanced or even a basic level unit to accomplish the transfer. And that leaves the paramedic unit available for the 911 response. Same thing with if we're bringing someone over from Longview or Metro West, we try to have them do the hospital work first and keep the locally staffed crew that's most familiar with the medics protocol and the other area first responders in the 911 mix, so that we basically free them, you know, use those outside resources to free up the internal ones that are in shorter supply, but much better if they're local and you know, as intensely familiar as possible. We do, when those units come over from outside, have them switch into a unit that is from here. So when we first started doing this, they would come over in a Metro West ambulance, which carries all the same medication, but it might be in a different shelf or in a different colored kit or whatever. As we identified that created some operational things where the local first responder might be used to jumping in the back to help and know right where to find stuff. And we got feedback that, hey, this doesn't really quite work that well when they're in a different ambulance vehicle. We've now set it up to where when the crew comes over, they leave their vehicle they drove over with, the ambulance they came over with, parked here, jump into a medic's ambulance, and they've all had to go through orientation to make sure they're familiar with where everything is. But that way they're operating out of a unit that everybody in the system here is familiar with.
And has standardized communications now to ensure that there's, you know, pre-arrival communication with those first responders. So I think, you know, that's going to be a big component or what we're already implementing. I know that Medics has been working with Warrenton Fire Department to start a communications procedure. I think that that was supposed to roll out last week when I issued the letter, but the chief of Warrenton wanted to do some additional training with his staff to ensure they understood kind of when to switch over, what channel they were switching to, all of that. And from what I understand, with talking with the general manager, that's supposed to start today. and then that'll be expanded from Warrenton to the rest of the other departments. We're phasing it in because of the additional communication demand on the medics dispatch center. We really want an understanding of how much additional traffic that's going to create on the channel, and also manage kind of expectations around the level of communication that should be happening pre-arrival. And once we get that ironed out, we'll start to bring on additional fire departments into that procedure. But the reason we decided to go the route of utilizing the medics channels is because I think in the Fire Defense Board's request, they had recommended switching to fire channels, but the communication system, there are more fire channels that they operate on. The coverage isn't as good as the coverage on the medics communications system, and it would generate additional traffic for the 911 centers that are already under-resourced. So they didn't want more radio traffic on the fire channels. So that's why we've gone the direction that we have, trying to be responsive to the fire departments, but doing it within the confines of our current system. I think we covered, most of the stuff in the letter in a more, I guess, less structured way, conversational way. But one thing that I did want to discuss is zone response time compliance, and I wanted to point out that since the board made the changes to the coverage requirements, we have seen improvement in response time compliance. And for the first time since 2021, medics response time compliance is above 90%, which is their contractual performance requirement. So we've seen improvements, and as they get additional staff on board, I think that we'll continue to see improvements. I think for now, until those staff are in place, we've probably leveled off. We've gotten above the 90%, but as more staff are generated and to fill the gaps, I fully anticipate that we may see additional increases and maybe approaching, pre-COVID levels. So I think that's really positive. I think the board, back in 2022 took decisive action. I know they're, culturally within the industry, it took some time for us to get to a place where it was actually implemented. But once that implementation occurred, we've seen a quick turnaround in the responsiveness of ambulances. And I think, we can look to Multnomah County and the struggles that they've had. AMR was on the same timeline as medics in making their request, and the Multnomah County just granted the changes to their staffing levels, and we've seen recently in the news that change dramatically increased their response compliance as well. So I think the board should be commended, for taking decisive action to ensure that individuals, patients within our county are receiving ambulance service, receiving ambulances to get them to the hospital. So with that, I guess I will open it up to any questions that the board may have.
All right. Do we have any additional questions? I know we've all asked several. Here's Commissioner Thompson.
I appreciate what you're doing. I remain concerned about that mid-county area and the level of, I would say, social disorganization that exists out in the woods. I think that's a population that can be particularly problematic for community volunteers. And to whatever extent you can give extra attention to that. I want to say that, number one. Number two, in terms of regulating professionals, I would caution us not to just open up all the floodgates. One of the things that stopped, 25 years ago or more, the shifting of the licensing requirements was the lack of effective investigations for breaches of, I would say, medical malpractice. The advantage of a licensing board is that the licensing board members understand the exercise of the professional skill, and they are very good, for the most part, in investigating and regulating their professionals. There are instances of sexual abuse, patient assault, failure. I mean, we've seen the nursing board has had some of those, and they're very rigorous about what they do. So I do want to maintain that protection of the public while still supporting a facilitated welcoming of new and ethical practitioners into the field. Thank you.
And I will say, Commissioner Thompson, that I think that I definitely understand the investigation component of it. I'm hoping through modernization that we'll see more staffing within the EMS division for investigation of, different types of disciplinary issues. But I think, locally too, one of the steps that we're taking or will be coming to the board for action, Sean alluded to it earlier, is an EMS peer review committee. So as part of that, there will be a body of all the providers within our system that are evaluating calls on a call-by-call basis to ensure that we're providing that we've got controls and we're assuring that the quality is there. And I think with, how we're structured as far as having medical direction, I mean, all of the providers are operating under a doctor's license. So it's incumbent upon them to self-report when there are issues, because that could have implication for that doctor's license, as well as, their license issued by the state to operate. So I think, everyone within the system, is trying to provide, the highest level of care, and there is, accountability. There's just some gaps in that accountability currently that we need to fill, and I think this peer review committee will be part of that. I did include a number of amendments or administrative corrections to the ASA plan in the package. I think the most substantive of those changes was the peer review committee, and I will actually be bringing all of these back to the board at a regular meeting for action to actually implement these changes and submit an updated copy of our ASA plan to the EMS division within OHA for review before it's actually implemented. So I'm hoping to bring that back to the board, before the end of October, so that way we can move forward with the peer review committee starting to meet in November, because I think it's a critical component, new element to our system that we need to facilitate the creation of and support in, taking on some of these issues. As I mentioned earlier, the ASA committee and plan has a very specific purpose. And part of that is to encourage, collaboration, cooperation, coordination between the different elements. And I think the EMS peer review committee is the tool by which that happens.
Any other questions, comments?
I'd just like to say thank you for Chair and Commissioners for inviting me, allowing me to participate with Justin today, and certainly happy to always be available for any kind of discussions about this. It's my life's work, so I'm extremely committed to making it work for you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. We really appreciate you being here today to answer questions and participate in the discussion. And thanks again, Justin, for the overview. And I think this was good. I think we all have the same motives. We want to make sure we can provide the best service possible. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do we have anything else on our agenda? Okay. We will go ahead and adjourn. Have a good rest of your Wednesday.